I'm Rich Whitehouse. I believe my official title on this project is Jaguar Master, which is a Beastmaster reference. But basically, I wrote the Atari Jaguar emulator for the project, everything, from scratch, and anything, you could possibly ask in the technical domain of the Jaguar, I can probably answer.
I'm Jeremy Williams. I'm an engineer on the project. I worked on one of the reimagined games called Vector Sector, and I did the UI work for the UI engineering and the background designs for the timeline section of the product. The museum area.
Hi, I'm Dave Reese. I'm a software engineer at Digital Eclipse, and I worked on Airworld. I worked on Haunted Houses, and I touched just about every other part of the project in a number of different ways.
I'm Chris Kohler. I'm editorial director, which means I head up all of our historical research and writing and editing and all that kind of stuff. And that means for this project, did the concept and the design and the work in the interactive timelines and the writing and the historical narrative and all that. And I scanned a lot of things.
My name is Stephen Frost. I'm the head of production at Digital Eclipse, but on this project, I was the executive producer on it. So I kind of try to keep the train moving forward. But yeah, this is a sort of small portion of the team, but definitely some important key members of that team.
So before I get into the nitty gritty of this stuff, can someone give me a quick overview about what this 50th anniversary collection is all about for someone who's never heard of this before until now?
Well, we're avoiding trying to call it a collection. We called it the Atari 50th Anniversary Celebration because we really wanted to do something that is different, even from the other products that we've made, rather than kind of say, here's a whole list of video games that you can play, and then over here, here's all these bonus features that you can go look at if you want to really try to kind of move the ball forward a little bit and create something that is an integrated museum type experience where you start out at the beginning of Atari history, you follow through the timelines, you can jump in and jump out of games at any time and then kind of go back to that digital museum experience. And everything is integrated in a way that it wraps as much context around those games as possible, which I think you really need for this in particular, because we're asking people to go back and play Pong again, which is 50 years old this year. And we're including Pong in the same collection as games, as brand new games like Jeremy and Dave's games, but also games like Atari Jaguar games, like, Fight for Life and Trevor McFur and the Crescent Galaxy. And these games are so disparate and they come from so many different eras that it's like, we have to show that progression. We have to say, why was this game made and why do we want you to play it now? And so we feel that this way of doing things is really the right way when you consider the depth of what's actually involved in this product.
I mean, I can riff off that a little bit. And I think one of the main things that I think we wanted to try to do was obviously not only appeal to hardcore Atari fans who are still going to get quite a value out of this, but also those sort of more casual Atari fans who might not have been following the company recently, who have some familiarity with it, but not to the degree of a lot of other folks. So the design of this sort of celebration is very digestible and allows you to have a lot of entry points into it. And I kind of equate it to as Chris was sort of talking about, a museum sort of exhibit where you walk into this room and it's a particular topic, but there's over to your left, there's a placard with some text on it describing something. Over here, there's a video playing, and over here, there's an interactive kiosk with something. And you can kind of go to where you want to, based off of your own personal interests. And so I think a key fundamental difference between this collection and other ones that we've even released, where the museum and the games are sort of separated into their own sort of kind of departments, is we've tried to make everything very seamless, where you can jump around and navigate very easily, not only between the timelines, but the games and jumping back. So you can really digest this in a manner that is your own, in your own way. We aren't forcing you down a certain path. I think that's a huge differentiator as well.
So can you guys go into detail about what involves, because people might know you from your Capcom remasters, Disney Afternoon series, the Street Fighter Collection, Mega Man, that kind of stuff. That's 80s. The Atari goes back even farther than that with different hardware. Is there what were some of the challenges when taking some of these games and recreating them for this celebration? Because like I said, they're a completely different hardware than the NES.
I mean, we sort of approach it in the similar way. Like, we had done the SNK 40th, anniversary as well, which is sort of the closest, I think, that we come to this sort of release, in that a lot of the games are quite dated. We had to go out and really search for a lot of that stuff and that information because it's kind of disappeared, right? Like, people have left companies and information is kind of, disappeared into the vapor of the world and things like that. And ownership rights over different properties is sort of questionable because you don't quite know, no one's at the company anymore and things like that, right? So I think for this one, fundamentally, we still approach it the same way where, like, the first thing is that at a base level, your cost of entry into the club, if you will, is just to have emulators that are accurate and performant on all these different platforms, right? That's sort of the first thing. And that was a huge task in itself because, as you've said before, we generally only have like 2-3 different platforms that we emulate in a given collection. And they're pretty known quantities, like, NES and forward. But when you start adding in arcade hardware, when you add in a variety of different hardware platforms that are not only, new to us, but just having to be built from the ground up, like Jaguar with what Rich has done, that cost of entry is still quite large. And so we really had to focus early on like, okay, how many platforms do we really think we can get in this, right? And really analyze that given our schedules and kind of determine that, because that impacts a lot of stuff, depending on what we can do. But we really pushed for it. Jaguar, we were even up to, I think, near the end, we weren't really even sure if we were going to be able to get it in or not, to a degree. Rich was like busting his butt, like working endlessly on that, but it was still questionable because it's a new platform. And as you know, the Jaguar is not the easiest thing to emulate. It's probably a reason why it's never been released in a retail sort of environment before, because it is very tricky. So there's a lot of juggling with that. And I think that's probably kind of one of the biggest elements that we had to overcome, was just the sheer number of emulators and getting those up to a quality that we wanted. The other aspect of it that is kind of different about this one is that fundamentally in the past, we approached these collections with almost a set number of games that we're going to include in them, like Turtles. We just released the TMT Cowabunga collection. We knew going in, okay, there's going to be these 13 US games, 11 Japanese games, et cetera, et cetera. So we really just build things off of that. In this collection, we really wanted to focus on sort of telling this narrative, historic aspect of Atari's last 50 years. And so while we had sort of an initial list at the beginning of games that we knew we really wanted to include in this collection, it kind of organically grew and adjusted based on the work that we had to do in emulation, based off of the story that Chris and Dan and them were trying to tell. And we had a lot of discussions in general about like, okay, do we include this? Do we include this? And then we're like, oh, well, from an emulation perspective, this is not working really well. We have to remove it. Okay, what replaces it in order to help tell the story? So, that was a big component in relation to the past, where we literally were working on the games list and the emulation all the way up to the end and trying to figure out, what helps us to tell this story. So that's a big fundamental difference from the past as well. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything to that. But
it's one of those things where we're just sort of spoiled for choice. There's so many Atari 2600 games that we could have included in the collection. There's so many other games. And so we were really able to really pick and choose. We didn't want this. We didn't want to blow people away with just like sheer numbers. It was,
here's 500 games.
Yeah. And it's like, it's possible that we could do that, but what if we were to cut it down to just this list of, and not even, it's not even just like, oh, this was a huge hit, or this one is fondly remembered today. But it's stuff like, we really wanted to get 3D tic-tac-toe in there because that was the first game that was designed by Carol Shaw, who was one of the very first, women to hold the job of like a full-time game designer. And so that was very important to us to have in there, to have that represented. And even if, the important thing is, we're not expecting you to jump into 3D tic-tac-toe and sit there and play it for 5 hours, If you read about it and you understand why it's important, and you jump in while you're in the timeline and check it out for a minute, and you jump back out, but now you've learned about it and you know what it is, and you have you understand what place that occupies in not just Atari history, but just video game history in general, then, we've done our job and you've learned something, and it's part of the full experience. So it's about like It's about giving you something that is more than just a list of context-free games. And so like that's why that's in there. And there's a great reason why everything else is in there as well. And we hope to bring that across.
There's also like this misconception of like, why are you putting bad games like in this celebration connection? But like even those, I mean, Rich will know this too. Like even those games have a story behind them. Why were they bad? Like what happened to those games? Like why did they fail so miserably when they were released? Like why do you think, for Rich, why do you think that's so important to have that history in something like this so people can read and learn about these games, even though they weren't bestsellers or biggest hits?
The obviously working with the video game history and stuff for so long, that stuff kind of hits home with me in terms of like, I don't look at games for like their market value, their financial value, like how many sales they pulled. It's more about like, did this game, introduce something new to the culture, to the design, even like to like the industry narrative that we all tend to collectively pull from in determining, what's going to shape the games of the future. Like there are so many things that I think go unnoticed or underappreciated in releases like that. And when we're trying to tell the story of a company like this, of Atari, and we want to go through the entire chronicle and timeline of something that goes back from like the 70s all the way into the early 90s with the Jaguar, there's so much more interesting material there to draw from than the games themselves.
For Jaguar specifically, I mean, I will absolutely say we did include every Jaguar game that we could get, because A, there aren't a lot of them, and B, it's just anything that we could get the rights to. We wanted it in there because the thing with the Jaguar is it's become this meme where everybody jokes about the Atari Jaguar, but nobody's played the games. Nobody's played it because you have to go out and buy an Atari Jaguar for like $500, $600. Then you have to, hook it all up, and it's like, already that's too much of a barrier for most people. But then the state of Jaguar emulation it's very in a very messy state. And so we're really actually, adding to the historical knowledge, we're giving people the opportunity not just to do it with sort of a stamp of legal approval on it and say, don't worry, we in Atari approve of you doing this, but like just to be able to do it at all. And so, that's really exciting.
And the approach there with the Jaguar being something that really hadn't been too nicely emulated in the past, and this brand new kind of R&D almost nebulous concept of getting a Jaguar emulator done for this collection. We kind of started out with like a list of must-haves, a few games that we just absolutely can't live without. This is why we're going to do this feature. And as the emulator evolved, we just kind of started grabbing, everything we could get in there. And eventually it became quite robust, I think.
As someone who knows very little about software engineering or game development, like, can you go into details like what's challenging about recreating a game that was released in 1977, or even with the Jaguar? Like, what were some of the software problems you ran into? Because now we have PCs that can do 4K, ultra wide, 60 hertz, HD, and but that was not a thing in the 70s, 80s, or even 90s for a long time.
Yeah, I could get super technical in the details there. I'll try to keep it a little higher level. But basically the challenge is, I think the Jaguar sits in a really unique place in terms of, it's got these three parallel processors. Two of them are custom RISC chips, brand new silicon designed specifically for this system. And it's got a pretty impressive amount of just pure processing power in it for the era. But at the same time, it also demands something pretty close to cycle accuracy to be able to emulate it reliably. Because if you mess timing up even slightly in a lot of these games, you start running into crashes, and you run into bugs that the original developers never had to deal with because they were just kind of skirting by on the original hardware timing. So that was a pretty huge challenge in getting a substantial portion of the library running, is just overcoming these pretty strong demands in both, okay, you need to emulate this thing that is pretty processor intensive, but you also need to do it really accurately, and you need to do it on these platforms that are not so powerful in the modern day.
It's really interesting how that works. Jeremy, talk about the museum a little bit. Like, what is this going to be on offer here? Like, what were some of the challenges when recreating something like that in a approachable way when you have all this history in front of you? So you're not just like, here's a 900-page wall of text.
Yeah, I would say the challenge was we had so much content in there. How do we want to present that in a way that is that's not overwhelming and is also interactive, and it feels like you're sort of accomplishing something as you progress through it. So we came up with this idea of having these kind of branching of timelines that go chronologically through time, and there's 5 of those. But you can also, throughout this timeline, go vertically. So you can dive deeper into a subject, and that's how we kind of nestled a bunch of information together around this same kind of hub topic. And like Stephen mentioned earlier, you can also jump from the timeline. If you're looking at a particular game or a subject, you can jump right there to that game and play it, and then exit the game and return back to where you left off. And we also, we added 3D models to the timeline, which is a first for us. So we have 3-dimensional boxes that you can spin around, which the scans for those things are enormous. So you can actually see like price tags on some of them if you flip them and look at the bottom and see the texture and everything. So that's a lot of fun. It kind of makes it feel real to me when you can sort of see the old 2600 boxes and spin them around. We also added a system where as you progress through, you complete every single node. So we call these nodes, like every single thing in the timeline is a node. And as you view it, it's a movie, or you zoom into it, or if it's just text, if you read it, it will sort of explode in a little animation. And as you progress through, those all fill up. And from the main menu, you can see how far you've progressed through each one. And there might be a prize if you do complete all 5 of them.
Might be.
Yeah,
Would you say this is the biggest collaborative project that Digital Eclipse has done since its inception as a studio?
It's definitely one of the largest ones. I mean, it's sort of a toss-up because this is big in different ways. Cowabunga Collection, our last one, is huge from an asset perspective as well. I mean, so huge in fact that it has a search engine in it for the assets. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but yeah, there are so many assets in there that Chris Kohler had to go in and tag all this stuff. And so you can actually search for like, how many times does pizza appear on blah in this blah? And so it had an immense amount of just like assets in relation to quote unquote museum content, but the number of games is actually quite manageable. In this case, we also have not only a ton of museum content that we had to, as Jeremy was saying, try to display in sort of an intuitive and easy to digest manner, but we have like 103 games in here still. And that's a lot to wrangle, right? And especially if you're talking how many different platforms we're on. So I mean, I think from a game size scope, for sure, this is our largest collection. And from a just a content perspective in general, it definitely, between Cowabunga and this is definitely our 2 largest by far. They're our largest in build size and content, number of games, for sure. And, and like what Jeremy even hinted at, we even actually went in and added additional things like Easter eggs. There's hidden games in this sort of celebration that Dan, who's not here, wrote up some riddles for it, but you'll see it in the games carousel. They're like sort of these games secret, classified folders, and they have redacted names and stuff like that. And you'll have to read the riddles in order to, and go off and do certain things in order to unlock them. But we wanted to sort of pay homage to kind of that Easter egg, the adventure sort of start of all of this stuff. And so there's a lot of attention to detail there. So even in that aspect, it's quite large for us as far as a release.
Importantly, though, there are just a handful of games that are Easter eggs. We really did not want to lock very much away, though, because it's not about like going to a museum. A museum is not an escape room where you have to solve puzzles in order to see the rest of the museum. It's about everything being available to you. Libraries don't lock. Maybe they lock some, but you know what I mean. So in general, the interactive timelines are fully there for you to get the whole history and everything. Nothing is locked away save for a couple of bonus games that we put in there, and that was really by design. We want to make sure that everything is available to the players so that you can read, skip around, do whatever it is you want to do.